Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey friends, God bless you. Thank you for listening, watching. Thank you for sharing the podcast. Before we get into the topics today, and there's many important topics with our guest, Cheryl Chumley of the Washington Times, I want to just shout out to some states, since it'll take a while to read the names. We're just going to go down the list of recent donors. Thank you for praying, and thank you for supporting Worldview Matters. We just heard from Minnesota, again, a different person actually, Nevada, Maryland, Ohio, of course, Wisconsin, California, Wyoming, Washington, New York, Georgia, Nebraska, South Dakota, Virginia, South Carolina, and Iowa. My question is, where's Texas? Come on, we've been at this for what, 6 months? Where's Texas? Anyway, we know we have listeners there, viewers, but thanks for your time. Guys, Cheryl Chumley is with us. She's an online opinion editor and commentary writer and host of the Bold and Blunt podcast for the Washington Times. She's a frequent media guest and public speaker, the author of several books. We're going to talk about those, at least one of the recent books, Lockdown. You can email her, cchumley at washingtontimes.com, on Twitter at ckchumley. And her recent books, going back to 3 books ago, Police State USA, the one before the recent one, Socialists Don't Sleep, Christians Must Rise, or America Will Fall. And the recent book we'll talk a little about right now, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Cheryl Chumley, welcome to Worldview Matters. Thanks for your time today.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. It's good to connect here. We did on the audio, radio before, but it's good to see you. I love doing this format where I can see people and have them explain what I've been asking people to share with our audience. But let's start with a lockdown. There's a theme in your books, government power, government control, socialism. But the most recent one, Lockdown, there is a socialist plan. And just share a little bit about that. And of course, they can get it on Amazon. Share a little bit about Lockdown, please.
So I wrote Lockdown early on in the coronavirus crazy in this nation when I saw that the government was using the fear to justify seizing individual liberties. And I was alarmed. And so I started researching it. I wrote it. It came out in 2021. It was supposed to have come out even earlier, but because of all the coronavirus slowdowns on things, it got delayed. But I give a look back on how we went through the loss of individual liberties in this country. But more importantly, for now, I give a look going forward, how the globalists, the leftists, the Marxists, and all those who do not cherish individual freedom in America are seeking to platform into the next lockdown, into the next seizures of liberties. And believe me, it's coming soon. And that's what I detail in Lockdown.
Man, after we saw what the government did and the power grabs in these last 3+ years, it's like, what else are they going to try to get away with? And we got to be ready next time, because there will be a next time. What are your thoughts on the next steps? Maybe we have an election coming up later this year. What are they going to try to pull out of the hat and use? The emergency powers? Are they going to blame it on January 6th? Are they going to blame it on some new virus? What are your thoughts?
So really, my thoughts come from just going to the websites where these people speak about their plans for what they want to do next. And the big vision of, say, the World Economic Forum people, the Klaus Schwab Great Reset type of people, is to take the coronavirus and segue into climate change, because they've already made the link between viruses that kill people and the failure of governments to address climate change and to clamp down on freedoms based on emissions and so forth. The logic is, they say that if people start building houses, for instance, in too many places that are currently forested, the animals living in these forests will live closer to humans, bringing with them their diseases. These diseases will pass on to humans, and people will die, people will die, people will die. So you can see how they're making the connection with climate change already.
And they are, absolutely. And that's a demonic movement. It's like, well, okay, people are the problem. Human beings are the problem. Anyway, we can talk about that another time. But I want to ask, where can people get your podcast, Bold and Blunt? It is at WashingtonTimes.com?
It's anywhere podcasts are offered, but you can subscribe to it directly at WashingtonTimes.com. Thank you.
Awesome. Oh, you're very welcome. Before we get to a recent article of yours, Democrats rushing to destroy America before Trump 2, TWO. Cheryl, you've been writing about these topics for many, many years. How do you decide what topic to tackle? I mean, from week to week, because there's so much going on, so many angles to look at, and there's so much you could write about.
My worldview is very simple. It's Christian and conservative. So I read my Bible every day, and I'm aware and have read the Constitution. And I take that viewpoint when I approach any issue I cover. So as I'm reading the news or I'm deciding what to write about that day, it's very easy to get my passions generated because there's so much that goes on that violates both those viewpoints. And seeing as that is the foundation of America, right? Christian conservatism, it's actually picking which one, not finding one to pick.
So one of the ones, before we get to the article I just teased, there's one I wanted to ask you about. I get your email updates, and one of them says, Bold and Blunt, deaths due to COVID shots. Yes, it's real. The media is not covering it. We've seen, well, those of us who are looking for information, researching, informed, we've seen videos of young athletes in their 20s having heart attacks, and myocarditis is a problem. That's another article you did. The COVID shot shows myocarditis. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that. You mentioned Senator Ron Johnson giving the latest data on and these agencies that are stonewalling him. So condense this for us.
So Senator Ron Johnson was on my podcast, and he has been one of the very few on Capitol Hill who has tried to track down the actual truthful data about the impacts of these COVID shots. And I purposely say shots because they are not vaccines or vaccinations. Red flag back when the government changed the definition of vaccine and vaccination to accommodate the failure of these shots to stop people from getting COVID. So that was red flag number one. But he's been trying to sift through myth versus reality and find out how many people are getting harmed by this. And if you look, I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but let me just say that Senator Ron Johnson and his staff have found, based on the government's own data, the VAERS data, that the health issues due to these COVID shots, in many cases mandated, remember, far and away outweigh all the health impacts from every other shot that Americans have been given as part of their vaccination process. When you compare it to the flu shots, it's so far and away the health impacts, negative ones from the COVID shots, than even the flu shot. So it's really something, as you're told to take the next booster, think twice, think 3 times even.
By the way, you mentioned VAERS. I want to make sure people know, because a lot of people are still finding out about these things. There is a website called openvaers.com. Right now it's 2.5 some million reports of vaccine adverse events. Cheryl, I've heard that is underreported on that site. How does information get to openvaers.com?
So you as an individual can go and report, but they think it's underreported because it's difficult for the average person to navigate, and not all the drop downs provide all the various issues that you as an individual might want to click on. So it's a little bit difficult to navigate, as I understand it. Okay.
Let's go to your article that I mentioned, because I don't want to miss out on that. I did want to talk about DEI too, because we've been talking a lot about DEI, the Marxist roots of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. But we teased this one, and I love the title, and I read it, and you've got some good information in there. I like the way you write too, when you were going, hurry, hurry, hurry. Democrats rushing to destroy America before Trump 2. So Trump 2 meaning assuming he's going to get the Republican nomination, assuming that he may actually have a fair chance to win the election. Cheryl Chumley, explain to us why they seem to be in such a hurry to pass as much legislation, as you say, policy, and regulations that will kill America's economy and constitution before the 2024 election?
So if you look at why the globalists and the leftists hate Donald Trump, it's because first and foremost, he takes border control seriously. And as a side issue from that, law and order in America, crime in the streets, crime in communities. And second off, he is very in tune with the dangers of the globalist governments being able to trickle and flow their anti-American agenda into this nation. They've been busily doing that under Joe Biden, who is basically an open door for the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, and UN agenda to come in. And when Donald Trump, if he does come back and take over the White House, one of the first things he's going to do is stand strong to these globalist forces and put a stop to much of the funding that goes into these agencies, while simultaneously cracking down immediately on the borders and even implementing deportation sweeps throughout America like he did the first time in office. So he did that. He has a proven record of already doing that. And this time around, I think he's going to do it on steroids.
I hope so. I think a lot of people are, I don't know, we're trying to be optimistic, but because of the voter fraud and what we saw the last election on massive scales, just the corruption, we're kind of going, okay, we're a little reserved. We're not as enthusiastic, but boy, we need a lot of help here, because it seems like what they're doing is they're dismantling America on purpose. And that is just the opposite of their World Economic Forum slogan, Build Back Better, which Biden used when he was campaigning. I saw slogans behind him, Build Back Better. And I'm going, boy, people just aren't connecting the dots. I know you write more about that, and one of the headlines in your recent article says Biden administration's policies have fueled worst border crisis in U.S. history. And that was from apparently the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. So there's that word that we rarely see, accountability. Our southern border, Cheryl, it's a mess. There's so many problems, whether it's drugs, human trafficking, illegal aliens, terrorists. Your thoughts on that, and why are they not held accountable for what's happening at the southern border?
Well, when you say they're not held accountable, the reason is because the media does a lot of covering for these globalists, these leftists, these open border advocates, right? So they don't have to face the PR firestorm that they would say if conservatives were trying to actually control the border. And as the note of optimism here, you asked my thoughts on it. There is a note of optimism. If you look at what just took place in New York City within the last couple of weeks, and the public beatdown of two police officers by thugs who are here illegally in America and being given entitlement pay by Americans, right? Housed and fed and so forth. And nothing was done. They were released on bail. The two officers were injured. And then several of those thugs were just caught out of state as they were headed to disappear into parts unknown, either across the border or in California using fake names. The note of optimism there is that even independent voters and Democrats, the sane ones, the few sane ones who are still out there, are sitting up and taking notice and saying, look, this border control situation is out of hand. And you are having Democrat politicians in some circles, quietly, maybe not loudly, but at least they're talking about it, talking about having to crack down on borders and control borders. So the note of optimism is that the tide is in the favor of those who value American sovereignty.
I agree with you. I was just surprised to hear sane and Democrats using the same sentence, but we've got to take
sparingly.
Got to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Worldview Matters with Cheryl Chumley.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily, world news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
Hey friends, if you're listening to our show via audio podcast, from what I understand, you can help us by giving a 5-star review to help the show rise in the rankings. I guess that's how it works. And we're open to new sponsors. Obviously, you just heard Harbinger's Daily. Thank you. The great website. Send us an email if you're interested in sponsoring the show. worldviewmatters.tv. Cheryl Chumley, Washington Times, is our guest. And I'm glad you brought up the media. I've got a question about journalists. My eyes were opened wide When Sarah Palin was picked to be John McCain's running mate as VP during that election cycle, and the media assassinated her character, they attacked her. Journalism completely died if it wasn't dead before then. I wanted to just get your take on this poll. We talked about this a month ago here, but over at Washington Times, it said only 3.4% of U.S. journalists are Republicans. Now, we know, Cheryl, this is a worldview issue. Again, your thoughts on that? Can you give us any understanding on why that is?
Well, my view of journalism was actually negative way before even John McCain and Sarah Palin, because from the inside, I saw how the bias worked. I mean, I've been in journalism almost 30 years now. And in newsrooms around the country, I can tell you there are some well-meaning people, very nice people to work with, but they live in a bubble and they think that advocacy journalism is the way to go. They think that pushing an agenda and going after what they view as the enemies of the democracy, which, remember, we don't have a democracy, we have a republic. That's a different topic, I suppose. But they think that their job is to defend the little guy, and they see the little guy very often in terms of skin color or gender, which allows the left to get by with throwing down race cards and gender cards and getting a free pass in the media. And as you go up the chains in media, what you see is this sort of bubble growing larger, where the journalists who are biased in favor of leftist policies are the ones who are rewarded. And you can see that by the caliber of the Pulitzer prizes nowadays, or other awards and recognitions that journalists get. So there are some well-meaning people, but they live in a bubble. And the worldview of many journalists I know is secular, and it's very progressive-minded, leftist, and that automatically puts them on the side of reporting on the government's point of view when that government is Democrat-controlled.
Yes, and for so many decades, it seems like if you are a liberal or progressive Democrat, you're above the law, where it's just the opposite if a Republican were to do the same thing. I mean, this might not be a great, perfect example, but Hunter Biden, if Donald Trump Jr. was found with his laptop, oh my goodness. I mean, completely different media reporting. In fact, that was one of the things that people were polled on after the election. And some Democrats said that if they had known that, it was actually a true story, they may have voted differently. Your thoughts on that, Cheryl?
Absolutely. And that was a purposeful intent of those in charge of the larger media outlets in America, the New York Times, Washington Post, the NBC, ABC, CBS types of the world, right? CNN and so forth, to basically cover, to not send out the reporting watchdogs on stories like that. And this is how it always falls out. When there's a Republican in the White House, all of a sudden you find the journalists picking up their watchdog roles, and they just want to get tough, and they want to do the dogged thing and dig in deep and run with anonymous sources and so forth, because it's important to save the republic. But when it's a Democrat in charge, they have a tendency to just believe what they're told. And I actually believe at certain levels of media, there are some card-carrying Marxists in charge in newsrooms that slant the coverage to be more pro-China, pro-globalist, pro-Democrat.
Absolutely. And this causes a problem for any well-meaning, maybe college student that wants to go into journalism. If you are a Christian, conservative, independent, or Republican, you're going to have a hard time in some of those newsrooms. Basically, your boss is going to give you the marching orders. Isn't that how it works? You can tell us from an insider.
Hey, you're going to get laughed at, right? If you're in a, because every day in most journalism rooms across the nation, they have budget meetings, which isn't about money. It's about what stories are being budgeted for the day and who's going to cover what. And if you bring up issues and angles that counter the leftist viewpoints, such as taxes, it's not taxing people too much so you can save for a rainy day. That's how the left wants it to be sold. But really, if you're the one that says, hey, if government taxes so much to save for a rainy day, isn't that evidence of overtaxation? And it should be returned to the people. It's things like that you're going to be mocked at and laughed at. But, suck it up, because your voice is the one that will save America.
And just keep fighting, friends, fighting for truth. I mean, that's why we do what we do. Some outlets might censor us or shadow ban us or whatever, but hey, we're still in the greatest nation, and we are still free to some degree. We're losing those. And but anyway, that's for another topic. I want to talk to you briefly, Cheryl. You mentioned Marxism and the influence of Marxism in America. We have seen a lot of damage done. And now we've got this thing that seemingly crept up in the last couple of years. I mean, some people just heard about it when Claudine Gay had to resign from Harvard. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're pitting groups against one another. And this is not fair. It is not, it might be diverse, but they want people to maybe look different, but think the same. And then there's equity, and then there's inclusion. And you say these three words can really overturn whole systems and capsize entire plans, agendas, missions, and operations. Share more of your thoughts on that, because we know it's a cancer.
Right. So just look at what DEI can do in the workforce, right? Not only when you train your employees to think in terms of equity or inclusion, and they're basically cowed into their speech aligning with what the corporation wants to put out in terms of social justice or social reform. Think what it can do to the free market, to our capitalistic system. When you have corporations that are in business to please their stakeholders instead of their shareholders, which is what all the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum is about. What that does is it makes them adopt policies that are in line with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and environmentalism. And instead of being in business to make money, right, to please their shareholders, to profit and loss, suddenly businesses are in business to advance a social agenda. And it doesn't matter so much about making money. So it changes the entire dynamics of our capitalistic society, where corporations are acting more like quasi-governments, and more than that, like quasi-Marxist governments. And
yes,
DEI is very dangerous. It changes the mindsets of individuals, and really it will destroy America's free society.
And you wrote about that, one of the many great articles on your website at WashingtonTimes.com. People might think, well, that's just the universities, or maybe some corporations are loyal to DEI. Let's just give one example. I mean, there's many, many, many. United Airlines. I've got friends that will not fly United anymore because of their commitment to DEI. I mean, Cheryl, explain that for us in those terms when it comes to hiring certain pilots who are going to fly the plane, lowering certain standards. Go ahead.
Right. So if you want to fly, right, you want your pilot to be the most skilled pilot because you don't want to be worried that he or she doesn't know how to fly a plane. Well, United is one of those corporations that is heavy on the DEI and has announced intents to hire, I forget the number, but I think it was something like 50% women or minorities to serve as pilots in the next X amount of years. And so it seems to me that competence, skill, experience, safety, these are all things that you want in your pilot, not so much skin color or gender. But that's how DEI works in the corporate structure.
Gosh, that is absolutely astounding when you think about something that can affect your safety and not just, something at the college level where, we already know that system's gone. Anyway, Cheryl, I wish we had more time with you, but I'm thankful for the way you write and your boldness. By the way, how long have you been doing your Bold and Blunt podcast?
About 2.5 years now, going on 3. Yeah.
Well, you've written like that for many, many years. You've been speaking like that for many, many years. If you've ever seen Cheryl on an interview, but now it's good to have the podcast too. So I encourage people to get Lockdown or check that out. The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Any new books in the works? Are you working on anything else? Tell us about it. Give us a little tease.
I have one coming out in September, God-Given or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths.
Wow.
So, yes.
Perfect. That's amazing. So that's November.
September.
September.
In time for elections. Yes.
Okay. God-Given or Bust?
Yep.
That's great.
Final countdown, right? It's
wow.
God-given rights or forget America.
Yeah, you know what? We have a couple minutes briefly. There's a comment, someone shared this article that we talked about earlier on the Democrat agenda, they're rushing to destroy America. And someone said this, that you were talking about in the article, 2024 election is a tipping point between globalist, collectivist, authoritarianism, and individual-based liberty. That's kind of what you were just alluding to in your book, God Given, right? And or bust, because Marxism is the path that we're on. Just share your quick thoughts before we close here. Wrap it up with you.
Look, America was built on the idea of God-given individualism, and that's not just a blessing, it's a responsibility. So we as a nation have to put God first, which is where we failed in these last few years, which is why we are where we're at in the political structure. So it's God-given or bust, God-given rights, or we lose America for the foreseeable future.
If you can keep it. Wasn't that Benjamin Franklin? Someone, he said that to some.
Yeah.
The Republic. A republic, ma'am. Cheryl Chumley, it's so great to catch up with you. I'm thankful for your time. Lord willing, we can do it again in the near future. God bless you. And we'll be sending people to your website and reading your articles and checking out your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
All right. Thank you, guys. Share the podcast. That's how it gets out there. We appreciate everyone that prays for us and just keeps us going. We will keep speaking until we can't anymore. Lord willing, Cheryl, I know she will. We will. But we are thankful for just your support, too. So God bless you, friends. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.